My wife had a plan. 2 months in the making. A notebook full of lies. A paper trail she built from scratch. A divorce strategy designed to take everything. The house, the savings, my reputation. She had one problem. The smart speaker sitting on our kitchen counter. The one I set up. The one I paid for monthly. The one I completely forgot existed. She had no idea it was recording every single word. I'm 34M, average build, been working in IT infrastructure for 9 years. The kind of guy who sets up smart home devices, knows how cloud storage works, and still somehow missed what was happening right inside his own house. My wife and I had been married for 6 years. We bought a modest 3-bedroom in suburban Ohio. We had 2 cars, a joint savings account with just over $47,000 in it, and one of those smart home speakers sitting on the kitchen counter that I'd set up maybe 2 years earlier. The premium subscription automatically backed up voice activity logs to the cloud. I set it up. I paid for it monthly. And then I completely forgot it existed. She didn't know about the cloud backup. I'm almost certain of that now. The day this whole thing started unraveling was a Tuesday. Ordinary Tuesday. I was working from home, sitting in the spare bedroom I used as a home office, grinding through a network migration project. My wife had taken a half day and came home around noon. I heard her come in, heard her moving around the kitchen, and then I heard her voice, talking on the phone, loud enough that I caught fragments through the door. He never checks anything, you know how he is. I didn't think much of it. You catch half a sentence. Your brain fills in whatever makes sense. I figured she was talking to her sister about something mundane. I went back to my screen. The actual moment everything changed came 3 days later. Friday evening. I was clearing out old app notifications on my phone, the kind of digital housekeeping you do when you're procrastinating on something else, and I saw a notification I'd apparently been dismissing for weeks from the smart speaker app. Storage limit approaching. Your voice log archive is 87% full. Upgrade or manage your files. I opened the app. I hadn't opened it in probably a year. And right there on the screen was a full archive of every audio clip the speaker had flagged and stored since the day I set it up. Hundreds of them. Most were short. Recipe requests, music playback, weather queries. But some of them were longer. Flagged because the speaker detected extended speech patterns near the device, which was a setting I'd turned on for a completely unrelated reason involving home security. I scrolled through casually at first, and then I saw a cluster of long recordings from the past 3 weeks, several of them over 10 minutes. I put in my earbuds. I hit play on the first one. What I heard in that first 30 seconds made me sit completely still. Her voice, clear as day, talking to someone on speakerphone while she was in the kitchen. And what she was saying had absolutely nothing to do with anything mundane. He's not going to fight it. You know how passive he gets. We do this right, and I walk out with the house, the savings, and he won't even know what hit him until it's too late. A second voice, her sister, I recognized it immediately. Familiar. Warm. The same woman who'd hugged me at our wedding. And you're sure about the other thing? The documentation. I've been building it for 2 months. Little notes. Dates. Incidents that never actually happened. My therapist doesn't know I'm doing this, but everything I tell her is going in my file. By the time I file, there's going to be a paper trail that makes him look unstable. I pulled the earbud out. I sat in that chair for probably 5 full minutes not moving. Then I put the earbud back in and listened to every single recording back to back. There were 7 long recordings over a 3-week span. Each one was a phone call between my wife and her sister, conducted in our kitchen while I was either at work, asleep, or in another room. The speaker had picked them all up. By the time I finished listening to all 7, here is what I knew. My wife had been seeing someone else for approximately 4 months. The man, I'll just call him the other guy because that's all he deserves, had apparently been a friend of her sister's. They'd met at a family barbecue I hadn't attended because I was working a weekend on-call shift. She wasn't planning to simply ask for a divorce. That would have been painful, yes. But what she was planning was something I had to listen to 3 times before I fully accepted it. She was building a false domestic abuse case against me. 2 months of manufactured incidents. A journal she was keeping, she referenced it by saying, "the blue notebook in my work bag," where she was logging made-up arguments, fabricated moments of me being aggressive or threatening. She'd mentioned things to her therapist in ways that were technically ambiguous but would read a certain way on paper. She hadn't explicitly lied to the therapist. She was too careful for that, but she was shaping a narrative. Her plan, as laid out across those 7 phone calls, was this: file for divorce citing irreconcilable differences initially. Then, if I contested anything about the asset split, introduce the documented pattern of behavior as leverage. The house was in both our names, but she believed, based on whatever she'd been told, that an abuse claim would heavily favor her in the property division. She also wanted the savings. All of it. In the last recording, dated just 4 days before I found it, she said something that landed harder than everything else. I actually feel bad sometimes. He's not a bad person. He just isn't what I want anymore. Her sister said, "Don't go soft now." I'm not. I'm just saying. It's easier when I remember what I get at the end. I closed the app. I didn't confront her that night, or the next day. I understood somewhere in the back of my brain that what I did in the next 72 hours was going to determine everything. I work in IT. I know how data works. I know how evidence works. And I knew that if I walked out of that home office and started yelling, I would hand her exactly the reaction she'd been waiting to document. So I didn't. Instead, I made copies of everything. I screenshot every recording timestamp. I downloaded every audio file to 2 separate external drives. I uploaded them to my personal cloud storage. Not the shared family plan, my private account she didn't know existed. I emailed a compressed file to myself. I then spent the rest of that evening being completely normal. I made dinner. We watched TV. She fell asleep on the couch and I covered her with a blanket like I always did. And the entire time, I was thinking about my next move. I want to be specific about what happened in the weeks between finding those recordings and taking action, because this part matters. I consulted a divorce attorney the following Monday. I didn't tell my wife I was going. I scheduled it during lunch, drove to his office, and sat across from a man who'd been doing family law for 22 years and had the tired eyes to prove it. I played him 2 of the recordings on my phone. He listened without interrupting. When they finished, he leaned back and looked at me. "How recent are these?" "The most recent one is 4 days old." He nodded slowly. "And you can prove these came from your device, on your account, unaltered?" "I can produce metadata, storage logs, account billing history, and the device registration paperwork." He almost smiled. "Okay, don't touch the joint account. Don't move any money. Don't do anything that could look like dissipation of assets. And do not, under any circumstances, confront her before we file." I retained him that day. But here's where my wife escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Approximately 10 days after I retained my attorney and while I was keeping everything completely normal on the surface, she started her own pressure campaign. First, she mentioned, casually over dinner, that she thought we should revisit how the joint account was structured. She suggested moving to individual accounts for simplicity. I said I'd think about it. I did not move a single dollar. Then she tried something else. She brought up the car, my car specifically, which we'd bought together but titled only in my name, and suggested that if anything ever happened to us, it would be more fair if both cars were in both names. She'd consulted someone, clearly, who'd told her that jointly titled assets were easier to claim in a settlement. I told her we could look into it. We never did. The third thing she did was the one that genuinely impressed me in a dark way. She manufactured an argument. It was a Sunday afternoon. Nothing was wrong. We were just existing in the house. And she started a fight over something so trivial I could see immediately it wasn't real. Something about how I'd responded to her mother at a family event 2 weeks earlier, a comment I'd allegedly made that her mother had apparently found dismissive. I had no memory of this comment because I almost certainly never made it. The fight escalated, on her side only. She raised her voice. She used specific language that I now recognized from the recordings. You always make me feel like I'm overreacting." That exact phrase. Scripted. She wanted a reaction from me. She wanted me to raise my voice, slam something, say something that could go in the blue notebook. I sat at the kitchen table and said, "I hear you. I'm sorry your mom felt that way. That wasn't my intention." She stared at me for a moment like I'd done something wrong by being calm. "You're doing that thing again," she said, "where you just shut down." "I'm not shutting down. I'm listening." She left the room. I heard her on the phone 20 minutes later. In the bedroom this time, door closed, away from the kitchen speaker. She'd figured out, I think, that something wasn't going the way she expected. Not because she suspected I knew anything, but because my behavior wasn't matching the narrative she was building. What she didn't know was that I'd already filed. My attorney had filed the divorce petition 8 days earlier. She hadn't been served yet. Timing was deliberate, coordinated to coincide with what came next. She was served on a Wednesday morning, 20 minutes after I left for what she thought was a regular workday. I know how she found out because my attorney's process server sent a confirmation with a time-stamped description. She answered the door in her robe. She stood there reading the papers for a moment. Then she called her sister. I wasn't there for that, but I heard about the aftermath. What happened next was that she called me 4 times in 30 minutes. I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times, then answered the 4th. "What is this?" Her voice was controlled, but barely. "I think you know what it is. You filed for divorce without even talking to me?" "I didn't think you'd appreciate the conversation." A pause. "We need to talk. Come home." "I'll be home tonight. My attorney has advised me that any discussions about the divorce itself need to go through him." She hung up. That evening was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life, but I had prepared for it. I walked in, set my bag down, and she was standing in the kitchen. Not sitting. Standing, arms crossed, in a posture she'd clearly been rehearsing. "So that's it. 6 years and you just file without a word." "The marriage has been over for a while," I said. "I just didn't have all the information until recently." Something shifted in her expression. Just slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means I'd like to keep this civil and fair." "Fair," she repeated. "You want fair. You want to talk about fair. I have documentation, I have." She stopped herself. Caught it, but not fast enough. "Documentation of what?" I said. The silence was long enough that I could hear the refrigerator hum. "I just mean," she started, recalibrating, "I have my own perspective on how this marriage has gone, and I have a right to represent that." "Of course you do." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd tried to manufacture that argument 3 weeks earlier. "I just encourage you to make sure anything you put in front of a judge is accurate. Because inaccurate documentation in a divorce proceeding, especially documentation meant to support claims that affect asset division, can have serious consequences." She went very still. "What are you saying?" I said nothing. I just held eye contact. She tried 2 more tactics that evening. First, she suggested we try mediation, a sudden pivot to reasonableness that would have worked on me a month ago. I told her my attorney would be in contact. Second, she called her sister from the bedroom that night, and I heard her voice rising and falling through the wall, though I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. She knew something had shifted. She just didn't know how much. Here is what my attorney did with the recordings. Under Ohio law, recording laws fall under federal wiretapping statutes for this type of situation. And because I was a party to the household, because the device was my registered property, on my account, recording in a common area of our jointly occupied residence, the recordings were legally obtained. My attorney had a digital forensics professional verify the file integrity and provide a signed certification of authenticity. He then filed a motion that introduced the recordings as evidence in the asset division proceedings. Along with that motion, he included a detailed brief outlining the nature of the conspiracy captured in those recordings, specifically the manufactured abuse documentation strategy, and requested that the court take note of the bad faith conduct when evaluating any claims she or her attorney might subsequently introduce. Her attorney, who she'd hired in the 2 weeks after being served, filed an objection. The objection argued that the recordings were inadmissible as a privacy violation. The judge reviewed the motion and the objection and ruled that the recordings were admissible. Because they were captured by a device I owned and managed, in a common shared space, with no reasonable expectation of privacy under the circumstances, the recording stood. That ruling was the beginning of the end of her strategy. Her attorney had apparently built the initial case around the documented pattern of behavior. The blue notebook, the therapist file references. When my attorney subpoenaed the therapist's records and the therapist produced them, what was in those records was notably vague. Nothing explicit. Nothing that constituted a reportable claim. Just a collection of ambiguous statements that, when placed next to the recordings of her explaining her strategy to her sister, read exactly like what they were. Her own attorney reportedly advised her to abandon the abuse documentation angle entirely at that point. She did. What happened with the asset division? Under Ohio's equitable distribution framework, marital misconduct, specifically adultery, is a factor courts can consider. My attorney presented evidence of the affair. Her attorney did not deny it. The affair had been ongoing for approximately 5 months by the time we reached settlement discussions. The house was ordered to be sold, with proceeds split. Given the misconduct finding, the split was not equal. I received a larger share. The joint savings account, after a full accounting, was divided with me receiving 60%. Her attempt to position herself for a majority of the assets had, because of her own recordings, flipped almost entirely. She had one more move left. Her sister, apparently still acting as strategic advisor, suggested she countersue for some form of emotional distress related to how the divorce had been conducted. Her attorney reportedly told her that filing that suit in light of the existing recordings would be inadvisable. The suit was never filed. The blue notebook was eventually produced in discovery. Her attorney had to hand it over. My attorney read every entry. Then he called me and said in a very level voice, "This is the worst constructed evidence I've seen in 22 years. Half of it has no dates. 3 entries contradict each other on timeline. And none of it is corroborated by anything else she's produced." It was thrown out. The other guy, the one she'd been seeing, apparently ended things with her around the time the proceedings got serious. Her sister, for her part in the planning, faced no legal consequences directly, but their relationship was apparently never the same. I heard this secondhand, through a mutual friend, months later. I can't verify it and honestly don't spend much time thinking about it. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I filed. In the end, I walked out with a larger asset share, my car fully in my name, and no false abuse record attached to me in any legal system anywhere. She walked out with significantly less than she'd planned for and a legal record that included findings of marital misconduct. There's a version of the story where I spend the ending explaining what I learned about trust, or how I've grown, or what the journey taught me about myself. But that's not the part that stays with me. What stays with me is a Friday night. Ordinary Friday. Me procrastinating. An app notification I almost dismissed. The small, mundane, completely accidental moment where I opened a recording I hadn't known existed. She built a 2-month strategy. She kept a notebook. She shaped conversations with her therapist. She manufactured an argument. She tried to retitle a car. She worked with her sister like they were running an operation. And the thing that ended all of it was a cloud storage notification about a device she didn't realize kept records. I set up that speaker. I paid for the subscription. I forgot it existed. Sometimes the thing that protects you is the thing you stopped thinking about. The settlement check cleared on a Thursday. I was sitting in my new apartment. Smaller, quieter, genuinely mine. I made coffee. I sat by the window, and I thought about how close it came. How if I'd dismissed that notification, the way I'd dismissed every other one for months, I would have walked into a divorce proceeding carrying a fabricated paper trail with no idea it existed. I'd be the guy who lost his house, his savings, and his reputation to a blue notebook full of lies. Instead, I'm the guy who almost didn't open an app. Now I want to know. Drop the comments if you think he did the right thing. Drop you think he should have confronted her the moment he found those recordings. And if you've ever had someone close to you secretly working against you, tell me your story below, because something tells me he's not the only one this has happened to.